Thanks very much, and thanks for the opportunity to come and speak today. It's a real privilege to be able to be here and just share with you a little bit about aged care and the aged care workforce, a little bit about myself. It's always good to start a presentation with at least talking about yourself so you know that people know why you are speaking to them. So I grew up actually out in Dalby. I'm a local boy. I worked in Toowoomba for a number of years in various different roles. I never thought that I would end up working in aged care, but for the last 4 years I've worked for Southern Cross Care, and prior to that I worked in healthcare for a little while. Growing up, my mum was a nurse, and I knew that she would go and work at the hospital, but I didn't really understand that she was actually working in the aged care attached to the hospital, and she did that for about 30 years. She would come home and talk about the care that she provided, and I think that's I feel really privileged to be able to work in an industry where it is really about care, and being able to sort of follow in her footsteps in a very small way. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my company. I won't talk a lot about Southern Cross Care. You've heard the introduction. I'll try and do the best I can to talk more generally about the industry of aged care, and I'll do the best I can to make sure it's an accurate reflection. I'll talk a little bit about the skills that we need in aged care, and the challenges that we face, and a little bit about the future for aged care. I'll try and share with you some of what I think you need to know about working in this industry, and preparing for the challenges going forward. So you probably haven't heard much about aged care over the last couple of years. It really hasn't been in the news at all. There hasn't been a Royal Commission into aged care. It hasn't been on the news recently about the poor pay that our workers receive. Really, aged care, I think, working with older people has really been at the spotlight for all the wrong reasons over the last couple of years. The Royal Commission was an attempt, I think, to try and shine a spotlight on what was happening in our care for older Australians. And what that did was it actually pointed out some of the deficiencies, and there were plenty of those. But for the vast majority of people who go to work every day and work really hard at caring for vulnerable people, it was really demoralising for them. They felt that they were being sort of victimised by a government and institutions that didn't really understand how hard they worked and what they were really trying to do. So aged care has got a lot of bad press in the last few years. During the recent, obviously, COVID, aged care again has been at the forefront. You would have seen a lot about the incredible challenges around keeping COVID out of our aged care homes. And the difficulty that was because it created this sense of social isolation and disconnection with families. But we also know that if COVID had got into our homes, and it did it across the country, the devastation that it caused. So again, aged care gets to the forefront. You see, people in full PPE and all of the sort of images that we saw around aged care. So it's probably not difficult to understand why many people don't believe that aged care is an industry that you might want to go into. But in fact, there's something for us to consider, and that is we're all getting older. It's one of those inevitabilities, except the alternative, which isn't great. So I suppose when you look at the figures, Australia is an ageing population. So Australians aged 85 or over by 2042 will double from what they were in 2018. By 2031, 1 in 5 Australians will be aged over 65. In terms of our workforce, by 2030, which isn't that far away really, there will be a shortfall of about 110,000 workers across the aged care workforce. And thinking broadly, about 1 million aged care workers will be needed by 2050. Now, I know that's a bit down the track, and you might think that seems like a huge number, but I'll explain to you why. When we think about aged care, what are we really thinking about? So, what is aged care? Now, typically those images I talked about, the Royal Commission was focused on, was really that little overlap in the middle of residential aged care. So effectively, businesses like Southern Cross Care, and you heard in the introduction, we provide residential aged care, we provide in-home care, and we provide retirement villages. And so really there's sort of these two circles of care and accommodation. And where those circles intersect, you have the residential aged care homes. And that's governed, that's regulated by the Aged Care Act. There are also different regulatory frameworks around things like retirement living and home care. Home care more recently has also come into the Aged Care Act as well. But you've got this provision of care in somebody's home or provision of care within residential aged care. So when you think about serving older people, it's a very broad, very broad range of people that we reach, both in their own homes and also in residential home care. And when I say own homes, that could also be in retirement living. So providers like Southern Cross Care, and I could list off a whole heap, St Vincent's Care Services, R Care, Blue Care. A lot of those providers will have a business stream around residential aged care, around home care and around retirement living, and really in an attempt to try and integrate those as best they can. So NDIS, you notice, is in there as well. So we have some NDIS clients as well. We provide low-cost housing. But this sort of business model would be quite common across aged care, the aged care industry. And of course, that provides great scope and range in terms of the sort of workforce that we need. So why is aged care a great career path? Well, it makes a meaningful difference. I told the story about my mum, and she did what she did, not because it paid well, I know that. She did what she did because she wanted to make a difference in somebody's life. And she did that through nursing in aged care. And aged care workers, I think, we survey our aged care workers, our workforce, quite regularly. And we ask them, does your work make a difference? And almost always, it's in that sort of 90% of respondents say, yes, it makes a difference. So why do people go to work? Because they want to make a difference in somebody's life, particularly somebody who needs care. Care is that thing that someone has to do for us that we can't do for ourselves. Service is slightly different. You get service, someone comes, gives you a coffee. You can get up and get yourself. Care is that thing that you do when you can't get up and get the coffee or tea yourself, and someone has to come and do that. So care is the thing that drives, I think, many of our workforce. It's an industry that's evolving. The Royal Commission obviously highlighted the fact that it needed to change, that the industry needed to change. We have a new set of aged care standards that have come in. There's a new funding model that's coming in. So for the last few years, we've had a funding instrument called ACFI, now a new one called ANIC is coming in. And hopefully that will also help improve the funding situation within aged care. What many people don't realise is that really aged care providers are price takers, not price setters. So the government funds aged care, which we take on, and then we distribute the funds as best we can. So really the issue of funding aged care is super important to be able to then reward our workers and remunerate our workers as best we can at a level that we need to. So the industry is changing. Many people within the industry will talk about there'll be a collapsing of those different streams more together, so that there'll be a greater sense of integration. The workplace, there's a lot of variety in the workplace. Aged care is not a one-size-fits-all approach, with professionals in the sector delivering a range of care types. So I'll talk again in a few minutes about the different types of jobs or career paths that can occur in aged care. There's a range of shifts and hours. So one of the really dominant things within our workforce is that it's really made up of a large number of permanent part-time employees, and they work shift work because it fits into their lives. So if I think about our workforce at Southern Cross Care, it would be predominantly women. Obviously, about 80% of our workforce is made up of women. A lot of those are mums who drop their kids off at school in the morning, go do a shift in the afternoon, come home at night, or go to shift early in the morning, come home, pick up the kids from school. So it works around their life, and I think that flexibility is actually one of those really positive things. And those that work nights, I just know there's a special place in heaven for those people, because that's a tough gig. Excellent employment prospects. I thought that slide before, when we were looking at the deficit in terms of the number of people who are looking for work in general, certainly applies to aged care. There are great employment opportunities. We are looking for staff across a whole range of areas, and it's a fast-growing sector. If I were to sit here and just name all the providers, all the time would just disappear. So there's certainly lots of opportunities across a whole range. Not-for-profit, for-profit, public, there's a whole range of different providers within this space. So talking about types of jobs, when we think about aged care workers, we tend to think about just carers, or we think about just nurses. But in fact, there's a whole range of opportunities within aged care sector. So the clinical pathways would include people like your personal carers, and typically when we're looking at our personal carers, we're talking about someone with a sort of a Certificate 3 in individual care or Certificate 4 in individual care. Enrolled nurses, so your ENs, registered nurses, RNs, nurse practitioners. So again, another level of clinical experience and expertise. Clinical specialists, quality and governance. It's a very compliant industry. We are really sit within a regulatory framework that requires a high level of compliance. So there are roles in that area. Audit and clinical risk. In the non-clinical pathways, obviously administration, lifestyle, so activities of daily life, activities, getting the residents together to socialise and interact in a fun way. Hotel services, so cleaning and food preparation, property maintenance, business management, so looking after the accounts and finances, and then operations support. So clinical, non-clinical, allied health, we have great partnerships with allied health providers, and allied health professionals come into our facilities as well. So you've got speech pathology, allied health assistants, physio, exercise physiologists, audiologists, occupational therapy, podiatry, just to name a few. And the professional services pathways would include things like accounting, legal, marketing, communications, strategy and research, IT, property and development, HR, mission learning and development, quality, risk and governance I mentioned before. So as you can see, it's not just about the provision of care. There's this whole structure that supports those workers and the work that they do. So I suppose that's one of the key takeaways. If I was to say what would I like you to take away from today, is that when you think about aged care, don't just think about the provision of care in a residential home. Think about the vast range of roles that you could be supporting to enter into the aged care industry, and think about that in terms of the broader sense of it: provision of care in home, provision of accommodation services and residential aged care, but that broader sense of it all. Obviously the workforce shortage that we are experiencing within aged care, some of it I said was reflective perhaps of the bad press that we've got recently, but it also is just reflective of I think an issue within society that we don't necessarily value care in the way that perhaps we have. We don't value how important it is to be able to provide that sort of care to older Australians who can't care for themselves, wherever that might be, whether that's in their own home or in one of our homes. This has been an issue that's been being looked at for a number of years, and the government has come up with strategic imperatives around building the aged care workforce. And I thought I would just share these with you sort of as in conclusion. So the starting point of this sort of strategy is looking at why aged care industry matters. So hopefully I've given you a bit of insight why I think it matters. The second imperative is the industry leadership mindset and accountability. So we really do need to be able to have a sort of one voice. And most recently, there were two peak bodies within aged care, LASA and AXA, and they've now combined, which I think is a recognition that we need to have industry leadership and a single voice at a national level. Industry workforce organisation education. So education is such an important part of what we need to do. So I think being able to come to days like today is a perfect example of that, being able to spread the word. Industry attraction and retention. There's no doubt that our workers haven't been paid at a level that they should have been paid. They do an amazing job, and we really should be rewarding them more than what we do. Hopefully, after Saturday, whoever gets into power will be able to rectify that in some way. As I said, we're a price taker, not a price setter. And that means that we really do rely on the government to be able to fund adequately aged care and look after some of the most vulnerable people in our society. In terms of the industry itself, in terms of attraction and retention, ongoing training and professional development has to be part of our total employee value proposition. We have to look at that, not just treat our workers as commodities that come and do the job, but look at them as people that we really care for. At the beginning, in the introduction, there's that line to live, to build communities where our best lives are lived. That's our vision for Southern Cross Care, and that's our vision for everything we do. It also has our vision for our workforce. We want our workforce to be able to feel that they're able to live their best lives. When you give up so much of your life at work, you want to make sure that that's a positive experience. And finally, translating research and technology into models of care and practice. We rely heavily on information technology in aged care. So the pandemic was a perfect example of some of the deficiencies that we hadn't really invested a lot in IT in some ways, but when we had restricted access into our facilities, we had to rely on Facebook and we had to rely on FaceTime and Zoom meetings and Teams, and like everybody, that we had to adapt very quickly. And now I think that's really highlighted the fact that IT is certainly one of those areas that we really need to continue to invest in. That's the main part of my presentation. I just thought I would provide some opportunity for any questions that people might have, and I'll do the best I can to answer them. Yes.
Question.
Yep.
Do you think there's any value in the Cert 4 individual support compared to the Cert 3 individual support?
And
what I mean by
yep.
that, sorry, is
yep.
when I say is there any value, that's a bit of a loaded question.
Right.
What I mean is that going to help people get jobs more than the Cert 3 is going to help get people get jobs? Or are they better off doing a Cert 3 and getting into the workforce and then building the skills?
I would say Cert 3 and building the skills. There is such a shortage of care workers at the moment that I think getting a Cert 3 and getting into the workforce and then being able to build your skills from there, that's the way that I would go. So I think very good question. Any other questions? Yes.
Mike, that last slide,
Point
3, what's industry workforce organisation and education? What's that? I mean, industry workforce organisation, is that you need industry? So those first 3 words, what do you mean by that?
Well, I think it means sort of advocacy as well as getting our act together as an industry. So I suppose and then being able to work with providers to be able to provide the education that we need going forward. So, knowing what we want, how we want to deliver it, that type of thing. Yeah. Yes.
What opportunities do you see to make the industry more attractive to younger people? You talk about you've got a workforce that's skewed towards older females.
Yes.
That obviously presents a bit of a challenge.
Yep.
What is the industry doing to present it as an attractive opportunity for younger people?
Yeah, again, really good question, because it's very challenging. A lot of young people are, they're looking at a whole range of options that they have, and caring for an older person might not be something that is attractive to them. What I would focus on would be the opportunity, career progression. So a lot of our personal care workers come in, some of them come in and they're very happy to be a personal care worker, and that provision of care is something that gives purpose and meaning to their own lives. Younger people who come in are often looking for progression. So they might come in as a personal care worker or assistant in nursing, an AIN, and then want to go on to do nursing. So it's a good pathway into that nursing area. So I think for a younger person, that would be one of the areas that I would highlight. Think about this as a transition into that. So I think that's how I would approach it. Yes.
What I'm thinking is probably building on from what you said. Is the industry looking at any sort of PR, like repositioning the way that young people and other people think about aged care? Like it is about caring, but I also know about having aged parents and how much they can offer
Yes.
the community. So repositioning the way we think about aged care.
Yeah, I mean that negative press that we've got at that I mentioned at the very beginning. That's really hard. That's really hard to turn that around. And I think the bringing together at a national level of some of those peak bodies, hopefully getting an ear of the politicians and those in leadership. But it does need a campaign to really try and when I say that, I don't mean this with any disrespect to those in the union movement, but it needs a campaign that doesn't just bash workers and providers for not paying enough. It needs a campaign that actually lifts up the importance of what's being provided in the provision of care. And I mean, when you look, take a step back and look sort of globally and internationally, there are some societies who really look at their older people and go, what a gift they are to us. And I suppose when we think about our older people in Australia, do we have that same level of respect and admiration for the contribution that they have made and the care that they are now looking for from us? And I don't think they do. I don't think we do that very well as a society. So it makes it very hard when you get bashed around by the media a bit to then somehow turn that around.
Because I think the younger people, and I come from a school, I think the younger people, they need to see, like they can go through nursing and work in children's services, or they can go through nursing and work in other sexier contexts.
Yes.
I think a PR exercise in repositioning the way we think about aged care as the end of the line, and what I can actually get from, we talked about mentoring before.
Yes.
What I can actually gain from this industry.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Thanks.
All right.
Yep. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.